Carlos Thorne, our casual gamer, decided to call on one of our bully hunters.
Buckets!
There's something about him that makes a girl want to take him in her arms and...
World War II is an iconic and important event for human history. It is not some fantastical or fictional conflict dreamed up for the purposes of stories or novels. It happened, and it was real. And there are people alive today who fought in it. And as far as video games go in the Battlefield series, many will instantly recall Battlefield 1942 as the go-to World War II game of the series, though it was Battlefield 1943 that was the last to visit World War II when it released way back in 2009. And I do say way back because 9 years is a long time, especially in video games. Fans of the Battlefield series and shooters in general have been asking for Battlefield to return to its roots, return to World War II for a long time, for years in fact. But why? Why return to any point in history at all? Why would you ask for a certain setting in a game? What's the point? What does it accomplish? What does it give to the player? Why would you want that? Why would somebody ask, especially for years and years, why would somebody ask, please bring this game back to this specific time period? Bring it back to World War II. So why not make every game take place in the future? Why not have every game delve into the realms of science fiction? You can have all sorts of weapons, both real and imagined, fantastic battles in space and across the galaxy or the universe. You could have any kind of weapon, any kind of equipment that you wanted, and you'd really only be limited by your imagination. And all of it would be believable and immersive, and there wouldn't be any real limit to what you could place in the game. So why ask for a war that took place in a specific time in the past? Why limit yourself? Why make a game where you can only put in things from a very small section of human history and know that what you place in that game can be checked and scrutinized? Oftentimes, it is the limitations of technology that lend themselves to gameplay mechanics or to the experience one gets from immersing themselves in a time period. There's a definite difference in the feel of a game that takes place in the medieval ages to one that would take place in a far futuristic science fiction setting. You could ask a dozen people and maybe get a dozen different answers, but the reason why people want a game that is set in World War II is because they want a game that accurately, or at least believably, portrays World War II. The official Battlefield channel on May the 23rd released what you're watching in the background. This is the, believe it or not, official Battlefield 5 official reveal trailer. This is it. This is the official reveal trailer of Battlefield 5. This is not a Call of Duty game. This is not a Mad Max game. This is not some sort of an alternate history, post-apocalyptic game. This is supposed to be a World War II game, what you're watching right now. The trailer, which has almost 7 million views as of now, has an incredibly terrible like-to-dislike ratio, one that you wouldn't have believed if you couldn't see it yourself. It's at 51% positive, and it has been steadily dropping since it has released. I expect it'll get below 50% fairly soon. In fact, by the time I finish up making this video, I bet it will probably be below 50%. It's just a matter of time. This Battlefield, this official Battlefield reveal trailer, is going to be more hated than it is loved. And remember, this is following the Battlefield 1 reveal trailer that was made 2 years ago, which was stellar. That trailer is rated at 98% positive, just to show the night and day differences between the two. So a lot of us are scratching our heads and wondering, what the fuck happened? So how does a company like DICE, a company that is beloved for mostly making excellent games over the years in a series that's beloved by very, very many over a long period of time, how do they go from making a Battlefield 1 trailer that is beloved to making this dumpster fire? Well, if you can't tell by what you're seeing on screen right now, Maybe that will enlighten you. A quick foray into the comments of the Battlefield 5 trailer will reveal exactly why. The funny thing is that people who wanted this are not the ones who play Battlefield. None of whatever the heck I just watched was anything like World War II. This thing is a massive turd. This makes Black Ops 4 look like it's God's gift. Where is Captain America? Where is Wonder Woman? Are these the new Avengers? Wheelchair DLC confirmed. Feminism, I smell it everywhere. You get the idea. People are obviously very upset. Without a doubt, this is a PR disaster for DICE, and if I was working there, then I would have serious reservations about the rest of the reception that this game gets. The trailer, which is supposed to, in theory I suppose, depict a squad of 4 British World War II soldiers, has 2 white guys, a black guy, and a woman, who has a prosthetic arm. Which is absolutely batshit insane. Somebody at DICE had the bright idea that when people were clamoring for a good, immersive, authentic World War II game in the Battlefield franchise, this is what they would give to people. Imagine all of the money and the planning and the time that went into creating this trailer, all the while believing that perhaps people would be a-okay with this and this is just what everybody wanted. And that's not even going into the silly blue face paint and the fact that we have British guys running around with katanas on their backs. So now it seems like 2 years after my most popular video was released about Battlefield 1 and feminism, we have to revisit the topic with the next Battlefield game to release. There's a few different things to talk about, so we'll go over them one by one until we cover all the ridiculousness that we've been shown here. We have to talk about realism and immersion. We have to talk about, well, you know what? Let's do a good old response style video to something that I've been seeing online. All it takes is to go to Google, type in Battlefield 5, and then check the results. Go to all or go to the news, and you'll see exactly what I mean here. You'll get articles like this one from Forbes written by Paul Tassi. This year it's Battlefield 5 fighting YouTube trailer dislikes for a change. He writes, sadly, a huge portion of the pushback is that DICE has decided to feature a female soldier front and center in front the trailer and the cover art for the game, and she has a missing arm to boot, which has led to a very small but very toxic subset of fans lambasting DICE for catering to the social justice crowd. That's right, everybody, a very small subset of fans. Something that I've seen on a few articles that I've looked at. It's a very, very small portion of fans, a very tiny minority of people. Articles like Paul's confuse realism, immersion, and accuracy. Women soldiers technically existed during the war, so putting them at the forefront and featuring them so prominently in this game makes total sense, and I can't imagine why anybody would be upset at all. He even says in his article, I don't mind the trailer myself. I do want to know more about whether or not they're going full alt history with it. The fact you have to even ask that should prove the fucking point, Paul. People don't want an alt history World War II. They want the actual one. Of course, Polygon was quick to jump on it. Battlefield 5's female playable characters are here to stay. Says developer. A local minority of fans got called out by DICE general manager Oscar Don't Care. After EA DICE revealed Battlefield 5, a small but vitriolic cross-section of fans voiced its concern. Again, don't look at the actual numbers, don't look at the like to dislike ratio, don't look at the fact that the infamous Infinite War trailer for the Call of Duty series helped lead to the lowest sales that the series had ever experienced. Don't look about that. Don't let numbers and reality influence you. All you have to do is pull the typical game journalist nonsense and declare that the people who don't like what we like, or who want things that we don't necessarily want, they're just small and irrelevant and angry. Because that seems to be the trend here. If you didn't like the fact that a game that's supposed to be immersive for World War II, or in some ways accurate or realistic about World War II, is so prominently featuring not only a woman, but one with a fucking prosthetic arm with blue face paint on the cover. No. It's because you're angry. It's because you don't like women. And nothing that you say matters because we're just going to call you angry woman hater. And that will solve that. And those from which we should expect the most are the ones who deliver continually the least. Angry Joe, whose channel I've been banned from posting comments on in the past, by the way. Wait, are some of you guys seriously upset that there's a woman in this image? No, Joe. We're upset that there's a woman in the image in a World War II game, because it makes no fucking sense. I haven't watched Angry Joe in a while if this doesn't illustrate exactly why he continually misses the point. Let me ask you this, Joe, if they had a dinosaur on the front of Battlefield 5's cover, do you think that people would have an issue with it because they don't like dinosaurs? Or do you think it's because they think it's completely and totally out of place and isn't what people are asking for and have asked for years? Anthony Birch, who works at Riot, tweeted out, "So if you're a person who finds the Battlefield 5 diversity stuff upsetting, you have 3 options. 1, accept it doesn't really change that much, ignore it. 2, try to find coolness in something that is new and unusual to you. And 3, accept that you will be angry all the time forever." It's these displays of cuntiness that are the exact reason why social justice is not making the pushes that it wants, especially within video games. Because if you don't like it, then you're just gonna be angry all the time, and you're an angry person, and you're a white male, and your opinion doesn't matter, and you are lonely, and you are worthless, and your opinion doesn't mean anything, yada yada yada. It's the same thing we see over and over and over. If you don't like the idea of social justice in the game, if you think that it's silly that a woman is in this British battalion with a fucking prosthetic arm, that means you're going to be angry all the time at everything for the rest of always. Social justice does not make arguments, it makes declarations and it labels people. Let us turn our attention to the primary subject of this video, which is a Kotaku article written by Luke Plunkett. Oh no, there are women in Battlefield 5. I understand a lot of you didn't exactly need more of a reason to not read Kotaku, but here we are. So now we're going to, yet again, explore why the people who write about games journalism seem to be the ones who know the least about games and the people who play them. There are women in Battlefield 5, a game set during the Second World War. They're in the game, they're in the trailer, they're even on the posters, and a lot of people are very upset. Is this what their forefathers fought for? Continually, we do see that social justice advocates and the people who are always pushing pro-diversity stances in video games are the one who will preach tolerance out of one side of their mouth and then do everything in their power to sound like the biggest cunts imaginable and then wonder why all those evil gamers just aren't warming up to the idea. You see, Luke, maybe more people would be open to the idea if you weren't such a fucking dickhole about it. To recap, in case your job is blessed and does not require you to monitor the worst of websites like Reddit and Twitter, some folks are angry that their favorite violent multiplayer shooter, which has never been based on anything approaching historical accuracy, now has historically inaccurate portrayals of women and a black man fighting with guns in the Second World War. Already from the get-go, Luke demonstrates why people are consistently asking if video game journalists actually play video games. When he says the series has never been based on anything approaching historical accuracy, he's just fucking flat out wrong. That's why there are no AK-47s in a game set in World War I, and how come flamethrowers are not depicted in modern conflicts. It's the same reason why there are no holographic gun sights in World War II games, and why there are no remote-controlled surveillance drones in Vietnam. Every single game that Battlefield has in the series has a level of historical accuracy to it that doesn't compromise on the overall integrity of the experience. It's important to note that I should immediately have to state that deviations from this are exactly that. They are deviations from the norm. For instance, Bad Company 2 had an unlockable M1 Garand even though the game was set in modern times. It should go without saying, especially to someone who fancies themselves a video game journalist, that video games, more often than not, in fact, it's the vast majority of circumstances where the game will be accurate to the period that it takes place in. Deviations from this, again, like the M1 Garand, for instance, in Bad Company 2, are treated almost as if they are special and supposed to be inaccurate. It's used to make the thing stand out. Or they're used to reference a game that came before the current one in the series. When we look at this trailer here, and we look at the prominence of a disabled woman on the front lines of World War II combat, again, it doesn't make any sense. There's no purpose for it. It serves no function. There's no reason. The only reason that I can think of as to why they would put something into this game of this nature is because DICE is Swedish and the Swedes are super fucking cucked. It takes a special kind of questionable for somebody to make a World War II game and think, you know what, the sniper in the squad should be a woman who's only got one arm. Because in our special fucking universe, that makes any level of sense. Luke then foolishly decides to put comments from Twitter that are more intelligent than his article and prominently feature them. If all the men in this game aren't back home working in factories, I'm going to be pissed. Go all the way, you pussies. Hashtag not real social justice. Because fuck historical accuracy, gotta have a female on the front of a World War II multiplayer first-person shooter because reasons. Any chance the deluxe edition removes all the thoughts from the game? You know what screams World War II to me? A black guy, a woman, and two white guys fighting the Germans on the same squad. Why are there British women? What the fuck? That trailer was a caricature of World War II. Like if the war could get a cartoon done of itself for $3 at the beach. I was more excited before the trailer. Luke features all of these images, and I can't help but notice that especially the last three are really highly upvoted, which is strange if the claim that this is just a very tiny vocal minority is true. And it's not, but to hell with reality. In fact, that's probably what I would consider to be the motto of diversity in social justice. Just fuck reality. Just those two words, fuck reality. I mean, who looks at this image right here and says, yeah, that's a World War... Yeah, that's the kind of authenticity and immersion that I expect in a World War II game by DICE. That's just what I've been asking for years. This right here. Luke goes on, unfortunately. It's tiring to have to face this year after year, so it's almost not even worth pointing out, like the guy at the bottom there cries, that women served in armed forces across the world during the conflict. Mostly as support personnel, sure, yeah, and there were also examples, in the Soviet Union especially, where they served on the front lines, both on the ground and in the air. Nobody has ever said that no women ever served in any kind of military role in World War II. The argument has never been made, and if it has been, it was almost surely a Poe. Nobody doubts this, nobody contends it. This is perhaps one of the worst arguments you could possibly make against people who say that immersion is being harmed by the prominence of female combatants on the front lines in World War II. Did it technically happen? Yes, nobody is doubting that it technically did happen to some degree, despite how tiny and minuscule that degree was. Let's just focus on the British here and keep things topical. All it takes is a quick searchy search on the Google machine, and you can go to Wikipedia and look up the women of World War II, and then go to Great Britain. The most common role of women in active service was that of a searchlight operator. While women still faced discrimination from some of the highly stereotypical older soldiers and officers who did not like women playing with their guns, women were still given rifle practice and taught to use anti-aircraft guns while serving in their batteries. They were told that this was in case the Germans invaded. However, if that were ever to happen, they would be evacuated immediately. More importantly, the article talks about the limitations. Whilst women were limited in some of their roles, they were expected to perform to the same standard as a male soldier performing the same role. Well, that's not very feminist of them. And although they could not participate in frontline combat, still manned anti-aircraft guns and defenses which actively engaged hostile aircraft above Britain. Women went through the same military training, lived in the same conditions, and did almost the same jobs as men, with the exception of not being able to participate in frontline combat. Well, fucking scratch my ears and call me a good boy, Luke. That doesn't exactly sound like it fits in with the whole historical realism bit about the Battlefield 5 trailer. Do you think that there is any chance in hell or earth that if a woman with one arm wanted to be a frontline combatant in the British Armed Forces in World War II, they'd be like, oh yeah, sure, in fact, you're a sniper now? Even if you go to the official gov.uk section of the Women of the Second World War, it talks about the Special Operations Executive, the SOE, where Churchill recruited around 60 women to work behind enemy lines and to help prepare the way for the Allied invasion. Again, 60. 6-0. 50 and 10. Luke, nobody is saying that women did not play an important part in World War II. Nobody is saying that. It's never been said. Don't try and attack this argument. It's just a straw man. Nobody wants to minimize the role that women took in World War II. So, pointing out that it's ridiculous that you're so prominently featuring a woman on the front lines in combat who's not only a woman, period, but who only has one arm, to say that that is an attempt to silence the, I don't know how they would phrase it, the accomplishments of women, that's ridiculous. If something never ever happened and everybody, any layman, knows that it didn't happen, and it sucks away the immersion that they have been seeking for years from a World War II environment, then you done fucked up. So Luke continues, even though I suppose he has convinced himself in some capacity enough to believe it, that having women on the front lines in a World War II game is just a normal thing, and there's nothing unusual about it, and that it's totally historically authentic, and that nobody should be complaining at all. He says, but like, that doesn't even matter here. Any idea that this, of all things, is what shatters the credibility and historical credentials of a series that has long reduced the war to endless skirmishes between jeep-flipping, plane-crashing brave soldiers named 69XX Cum Lauder XX69 is insane. Watch this trailer and tell me that, above everything else, it's the gender and race of the combatants that seems unrealistic. Okay, Luke, the gender and the race of the combatants is not realistic. If you attempt to kid yourself that it is, then you're doing just that. You're trying to convince yourself that you can force this diversity into a place where it did not exist. It seems to be in a strange way a two-prong argument, because I see a little bit of both. I scoured a lot of comment section, read some tweets, did all that looking around while I was trying to gather some information, trying to figure out if maybe I and my layman's level of knowledge about the battlefields of World War II was missing the lost to history and forgotten battalions of disabled women fighting against the Nazis. And Private MacDougall, the samurai warrior who hails from the land of the rising paint. Either way, the response to this seems to be, oh yeah, well that might be unrealistic, but so is X, Y, and Z. And then we get into the whole rabbit hole of, these games aren't realistic. They're trying to be immersive and, to an acceptable degree, authentic. For instance, whenever you play virtually any multiplayer shooter, any Battlefield game or Call of Duty game, you have absolutely no trouble at all accepting the fact that human soldiers can spontaneously reincarnate. This is accepted without question. Nobody bats an eye or raises a brow. When you're playing an online video game, you know that if you shoot a guy, then later on, you might run across that same guy because he has come back to life and respawned onto the battlefield somewhere else, and he might fight you again. So why is it exactly that people can accept reincarnation in multiplayer video games, but like me and like clearly a lot of people, they have realism issues and authenticity issues with the fact that some woman with face paint and one arm is fighting the Germans on the front lines? And again, I'm not even going into the fucking samurai sword or the black dude. We're not even going to go into that kettle of fish, can of worms, basket of hydrangeas, or whatever. And again, it's really weird that I have to explain this to people who I should not have to explain it to. If my parents had asked me this question, I would gladly go into the reasons why one of these things is accepted and one of them simply isn't. But I'm apparently having to discuss this with video game journalists or professionals, quote-unquote professionals in the industry, video game reviewers. 99% of people, probably more, understand that a video game is a video game. You are sitting with a controller or with a mouse and keyboard in front of a screen. You are playing a video game. In fact, it is rare for games to make you forget you're playing a video game, and it's often lauded in reviews and by gamers that if a game can make you forget you're actually playing a video game by being that engrossing, that is a very positive trait and something worthy of praise. People, since they understand they're playing a video game, know that there will be concessions to the realistic depiction that takes place within that game. Soldiers will respawn, not because they did in the real world, but because there is a player behind the screen somewhere who wants to get back into playing the game. Guns never jam, because if they jammed and you had to worry about dirt and mud and things, that just wouldn't be fun. It would take away from the gameplay experience. Soldiers have hit points. You are proficient equally with all weapons and reload and rearm yourself at the same rate across the board every single time without fail. You can instantly enter inside of vehicles or leave them instantly through teleportation. A lot of us who are watching this, I would say 100% of people who are watching this understand that this is just a facet of many games that we accept as gamers. They are so prevalent, and we understand that they serve a purpose and a function, and that function is not to be historically realistic, but it's to make the gameplay better. It's to help us, as a player, enjoy the world that we're looking at through the screen. On Twitter and other places on the internet, I've seen the argument pop up, especially with this Battlefield trailer, that, oh yeah, in a game that lets you do X, and they show a picture of some glitch or exploit people have found in a Battlefield game, because you can do this, that's fine, but a woman fighting, oh, that's terrible. Because they don't understand things, and it's the most superficial analysis that you could possibly make that doesn't actually have any merit to it once it's examined. You're not supposed to be able to stand upon somebody who's riding a horse and shoot a flamethrower. It's not the design of the game. It's not the design of a game to do a lot of things. Games inherently will have glitches and bugs, and they won't function perfectly 100%, and there are things that the devs probably didn't intend for you to do, but are possible to do in the game. It's not because these things are realistic, it's that games have limitations, the technology has limitations, and people, especially when you have millions and millions of people playing a game over countless hours, over even more uncounted amounts of games, they will discover exploits. That's why these things are called exploits, and they're called glitches and bugs, because it's not the design of the game to allow you to do these things. Saying that, well, X bug exists in a game, therefore there's absolutely no reason to try and be historically accurate, is one of the most low-tier, basic bitch arguments I can think of. So really, it's not that much of a surprise it came from a Kotaku writer. Luke, unfortunately, continues his article instead of being quiet. Yet, that's where we are today, because we're talking about the words historical accuracy among gamers on the internet. I don't know what he's getting at here. I'm not going to belittle people because they are gamers on the internet. There are a lot of gamers on the internet, and they clearly care about historical accuracy, but I guess that he just doesn't think that it's a fathomable position that we're even talking about this. It's almost like the fact we're talking about this disproves him saying, I can't believe we're talking about this, because clearly gamers do care, but I guess to Luke, gamers shouldn't care, or they don't care, or they're not supposed to care. And it wouldn't shock me because, well, what's to be surprised about by a video game journalist on Kotaku telling gamers what they should and shouldn't think and feel about? He goes on, those two words rarely mean what they look like they mean. At face value, they appear to suggest a game has, or is striving to attain, some semblance of accuracy in its portrayal of the events of the past. I mean, Luke is so close to being aware of the issue. He's so close. He brushes against the face of realization. He's so close here, but he just completely drops the ball and doesn't see the point. Yes, games attempt to attain some semblance of accuracy in its portrayal of the events of the past. It's not perfect, they never claim it's perfect, and everyone who has half of a brain knows that it will never be perfect. He says, the nature of video games means that rarely happens. Yes, to capture history in a digital experience would require a developer to adapt the language, architecture, beliefs, society, and culture, it's kind of redundant, of the place and time being represented, and to do so knowing that the records of the past and subsequent writings were shaped by the prevailing politics. To truly present something accurate to the time period would probably result in a game you wouldn't really enjoy playing. Ding, ding, ding. He gets it. He understands. Exactly. That's why we make concessions to the realistic depiction in a video game, because ultimately there is a person on the other side of a screen trying to enjoy themselves. But Luke goes on, what we often see in a historical FPS action game is just the visual trappings, and that's okay, it's a mass-market action game, not a history lesson. And here he goes with his typical diversity, social justice, video game journalism nonsense. He instantly paints anyone who disagrees with him as an angry dork. What angry dorks mean when they say historical accuracy is not a game that's accurate to the time being presented, then, but accurate to the aspects of that time, or the popular historical retelling of it, that are sympathetic to their current political and cultural beliefs. This is deliciously ironic because Luke doesn't know jack fucking shit about history, apparently, and he's telling us that we want the game to be... It's all a mess. It's all a mess. This article is a mess. It is a Kotaku article, through and through. What Luke is ultimately telling us is that you are an angry dork if you think that the politically incorrect past should be represented in a politically correct fashion. You're a dork if you think that. If you have problems with the historical accuracy of a British frontline soldier who is a woman who only has one operating arm, you're just an angry dork. It doesn't matter what you say, it doesn't matter what you know about history, and it doesn't matter that to you, what's important in a video game is what's important in a video game to you. You are an angry dork. If you're okay with the Battlefield 5 trailer, and listen, not all the problems that people have with the trailer aren't just the woman. I mean, I'm just focusing on the women aspect here, but the silliness and the ridiculousness of the whole trailer it's its own thing. We're just focusing on the woman here. But if someone told me they're okay with a frontline soldier in a World War II game being a woman with a prosthetic arm and face paint, if they're okay with that, then fine. It's okay to be okay with that. And oddly enough, in all of the comments that I've been looking over across the internet, there doesn't seem to really be the attitude that if you're okay with it, you're a bad person, or you're an angry nerd, or you're just an upset male, or you're some MRA, or you're some piece of shit gamergator. That seems to be an exclusively one-way sentiment. The hostility is going from one side to the other. It is not being exchanged here. There are people all across the internet. You can go and you can find this. I've already shown some of them. If you have a problem with the depiction of women, then you are a bad person, and you're angry, and you're upset, and you're alone, and you're emotionally fragile, and you're unstable, and you're an angry nerd and a bad person. And this is, as I said, a one-way thing that's occurring here. And these people need to understand that if you're going to act like a total dickhole, and you're going to be an ass, and you're going to talk like a cunt to people because you disagree with them, and you don't listen to what they're saying, and you label them as things and dismiss them, your side's not going to win. And that's why it's not. That's why so many people, despite the huge pushes that are being made for diversity and social justice in video games, despite all of that, it's why trailers like this are being disliked so heavily. And it's why games with big social pushes don't sell well. Not only are you wrong and your arguments are terrible, but you're assholes about it, which makes us not want to have anything to do with you, all the more. Luke goes on, unfortunately. It doesn't bother them that a randomly created soldier with no training can jump behind the controls of a complex fighter aircraft or expertly handle a cross-section of enemy weapons. They don't care that the streets of European cities aren't recreated one-to-one, or that uniform details aren't strictly adhered to, or that Battlefield's war is fought to time limits and kill counts. I already touched on this a little bit before, but there are, again, obvious, unrealistic aspects of video games that must be made so that it is a, ultimately, fun experience for the player, because the player is playing a video game. They're not actually taking part in a real war around them. No, you don't have to go to flight school and have military training, nor should you, in order to fly a plane in the game. That would be ridiculous. Nobody would buy that game. It would not be a sellable product. And for gameplay and balance purposes, reloads will always be standardized across weapons, no matter who does them, no matter how many times you do them without fail, guns don't jam, etc., etc. I've made my point. The sad part is I have to try and make my point to somebody who is a video game journalist and should not have to have the point made to them in the first place. Nobody's asking for entire European cities to be completely and totally realistically recreated to scale. Nobody's asking for that. This is something Luke is pulling out of his asshole to make his argument sound good. And it's not. It only shows how out of touch he is with the way that gamers think. It's so weird then, because the next sentence he says those things are acceptable compromises. Like he doesn't understand. Like he's so close to grasping it, and he even says it. The words leave his metaphorical mouth and he still doesn't get it. He still doesn't understand. In his mind, having disabled, face-painted female frontline soldiers in World War II is a totally acceptable compromise to immersion. And he can't get over the fact that to a huge amount of people, in fact, what is going to become the majority of people, don't feel the way that he is. And it's typical of Kotaku as one of those lefty diversity SJW video game journalism sites. Of course he doesn't side with gamers. Of course not. He doesn't side with the majority of people. He sides with whatever the diversity position is, regardless of how many people agree or disagree with it. And there's some level of consistency ideologically with that. But he tries to say he's standing up for gamers with these positions. And he's not. Not only is his position the least popular one, it's the one that's demonizing the majority. He goes on, these things are acceptable compromises. It's a video game. And those are video game things that the Second World War just needs to accommodate with its representation in order to work. Yet introduce something as relatively harmless, it has zero impact on gameplay, as women or black soldiers where historically there were none, and suddenly the sky is falling. Okay, well, I'm glad that you've accepted now that historically there are none, but something can be aesthetic, right? And impact the player. Just because it doesn't have an impact on gameplay doesn't mean that something can't have an impact. Something can be purely aesthetic and remove immersion. It can impact how the player feels about the game. And if a player is looking for the feeling of a World War II game, then having women with one arm and face paint on the front lines of British forces in World War II is obviously going to have a huge impact. Because that's ridiculous, and it's ridiculous at face value. It doesn't have to be explored for people, the layman, the regular gamer, to go, what the hell is this? Something's not right here, this isn't how it was. Luke is actually apparently making the argument here that as long as it doesn't affect the statistics and the numbers and the gameplay that's happening, anything can look like anything, and anything can sound like anything, and there should be no problems at all. So if all of the battlefield soldiers were dressed as clowns, and they spoke, I don't know, Persian, then that's fine, because it doesn't impact gameplay, it only affects aesthetics. I guess that would be okay to Luke. But then again, Luke is a video game journalist. As long as the clowns are properly representative of the 72 genders, there should be no issue at all. He goes on. It's almost as though opposition to a British woman holding a gun or a black man serving in a combat role has little to do with historical accuracy, and everything about someone finding their current views on gender, race, and society challenged in a space, the good old days, they thought was safe. Well, this is just Luke making shit up. That's half his job description, I would imagine. People didn't really have a problem with the Harlem Hellfighters in Battlefield 1 because there was a historical reason to put them in, and it didn't break immersion. It was a battalion, a company, I'm sorry, I don't know the exact terminology, of strictly black males because there wasn't really segregation in the armed forces at the time, who fought against the enemy and who were very good at what they did, and the game portrayed them in that setting in a pretty believable way, and people didn't really have a problem with that. After all, the Battlefield 1 trailer was one of the greatest trailers that I've seen, first off, but it was rated 98% positive on YouTube. That's why in Call of Duty games, for instance, no one has a problem with female soldiers, especially in modern times, because in modern times it's much more believable. People don't have a problem suspending their disbelief when they see it in that setting. I mean, people obviously had questions about why the Germans had a black guy and things of that nature. And hey, in Battlefield 3, the assault class, or the medic class, was a black guy, but it took place in modern times, so nobody batted an eye to it. But if you do the same thing here in World War II, obviously people are going to have questions because it doesn't make any sense and it breaks with reality in a way that destroys the immersion for a lot of people. Nobody is saying that women are bad and black people are bad and things are bad and everything's bad and horrible. What they're saying is that in this setting that they're trying to present, the setting that gamers for years have asked for, a World War II setting, it doesn't make any sense. And if you're going to create these immense immersion breakers, then why have a World War II game at all? Like what I said at the beginning, why not just make every game a futuristic game where you can put anything in and nobody will bat an eye? Why not just do that? It's because people want specific time periods to be represented to, at least a sufficient degree, accurately. The black guy, the Harlem Hellfighters in Battlefield 1, that's how you do it correctly. That's why nobody had a problem with it. But this is forced, what we see in this trailer. This is forced. Literally disabled women. This used to be a meme, and now it's real. It's a thing that's happening. This used to be a joke. A joke because of how ridiculous it is. But put it in the game for realsies, and obviously people take a problem with it. What you're doing, Luke, is you're assigning motivations to a huge group of people. You might not think they're huge, but reality's a bitch, isn't it? You're assigning to a huge group of people motivations when they're completely unfounded. You're assigning to them what their thoughts are and what their reasoning is when you clearly have not taken any kind of effort in order to learn that. Luckily, the article about runs out of steam here. Battlefield isn't and never has been about recreating the past. He says this unironically. Luke says this unironically, as if all the other Battlefields, they totally weren't trying to recreate, at least to an appreciable degree, in an immersive degree, a time period. He says this. Just flat out, as a fact. He says that. Okay then. There are far more serious and studious Second World War games for that kind of business. Instead, it's always been about letting people in the present use war as a playground. And if DICE wants to broaden the scope of those represented in those games, here we go, then that's awesome for everyone involved. Well, almost everyone. The majority of people. Because Luke's okay with making these kinds of changes to games, because, hey, even though most people hate it and they voice their displeasure as it, and they can accurately articulate the reasons why they don't like it, at least disabled women can feel more represented in this World War II game. Because ultimately, that was one of the biggest problems with war. That was one of the biggest problems with World War II games. Disabled women weren't accurately represented. What a load of tripe. And again, this isn't going into the way that the trailer feels, with its chaotic, silly, over-the-top nature. It actually kind of sounds, from what I've read about the gameplay changes, that it could be an interesting departure from the standard Battlefield experience, and I'm interested to see how it functions in reality. But the first impressions that I get are that, well, one, video game journalists still despise gamers, but DICE isn't going to actually listen to feedback. They're going to keep things the way they are because, fuck you, you're just a consumer, and we're DICE, and nothing's more important than precious forced diversity. I was really excited for Battlefield 1. In Battlefield 1, it wasn't as good as its predecessor, but it was a good game, and I was excited to play that game after I saw the trailer. It was interesting. It made me curious about what they would do and how the game would play out. I was legitimately excited to play in this time period, just like I was excited when I heard that World War II would be the setting of the next Battlefield game. I said, good, finally. I haven't really played, I've never played a World War II-themed Battlefield game. That stuff happened before I got into the series. So I was really interested to see what they do. And now all I can think about is, man, if this is the kind of immersion breaking that's going to be in the real game, then I don't know if I'm going to bother, because the World War II appeal is ultimately one of the biggest aspects for me, and clearly is to a lot of people, as shown by that horrendous abortion of a like-to-dislike ratio. If I was DICE, I would be seriously concerned. When Call of Duty Infinite Warfare came out, one of the most infamous trailers of all time, it turned out the game sold very, very poorly. And I think it would be ridiculous to assume that was in no small part because the first impression of the game was so immensely negative. Maybe Battlefield will turn out to be the best one yet. Maybe it will be fantastic and all of the changes that I'm hearing about will work excellently when surrounded by other people. Maybe it'll all just flow together in just the right way, and we'll have reached the best Battlefield game yet. However, if you are like me, and a big part of your attraction to the idea of this game is the fact that it is set in World War II, and they have extremely unusual and forced immersion-breaking aspects of the game that will always be at the forefront of it, then I can understand why you wouldn't be excited. I'm interested. A part of me is really lukewarm and tepid. A part of me really is kind of worried. And I hope the game does well, but as it stands right now, I'm concerned. And whatever you do, don't go into the official Battlefield Discord and crack a few jokes or make a little, do a little funny, or else they'll line you up for a banning. And honestly, that just fits in with the rest of what seems to be the general response to people who have a problem with the trailer. If you have a problem with the trailer, then ban them. They're a bunch of bad people. They don't like women. They're being hypocrites. Or in Luke's case, they're a bunch of angry nerds. There's no legitimate reason why you wouldn't want a face-painted, disabled woman on the front lines of a World War II game. There is no legitimate reason why. You're just a hater. You just hate women. If you liked the trailer, then fine. That's fine. If you like the trailer, it's fine. It's okay to like the trailer. If you didn't like the trailer, maybe you're not a bigot, racist, sexist, homophobic, misogynist, fill in the blank, whatever it is. Maybe you have concerns about its ability to immerse you in the setting. But I can tell you this, if you come to my Discord and tell me that you really liked it and crack a few jokes about it, you don't have to worry about getting banned. Well, if you guys liked what you saw here and want to help support me so I can keep on doing what I'm a-doing, feel free to tosh me a bit of dosh on Patreon. I'm full-time on YouTube, and I get all my money through ads and from the generous donations of my patrons. And again, I've got some exciting things that I'm planning to do once I get out of this interim spot and back into my own place when renovations are done. Work on the second channel, live streams, and I've got some merch lined up as well if you want to show the world your love of all things doggo. Until then, though, you guys take care and have tons of fun. But not too much fun, you angry nerds.